Janiyati ashavairagyam jnanam cha yadahaitakam. Ladies, remember. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janiyati Ashavairagyam Jnanam cha yadahaitukam. Bhakti Yoga Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janiyati Ashavairagyam Jnanam cha yadahaitukam. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janiyati Ashavairagyam Jnanam cha yadahaitukam. Vasudeve unto Krishna, Bhagavati unto the personality of Godhead, Bhakti Yoga contact of devotional service, Prayojitaha being applied, Janayati does produce, Ashu very soon, Vairagyam detachment, Jnanam knowledge, Cha and Yat that which, Ahaitukam causeless. By rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. Immediately. Purport: those who consider devotional service to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna to be something like material emotional affairs may argue that in the revealed scripture, sacrifice, charity, austerity, knowledge, mystic powers, and similar other processes of transcendental realization are recommended. According to them, bhakti, or the devotional service of the Lord, is meant for those who cannot perform the high-grade activities. Generally, it is said that the bhakti cult is meant for the Shudras, Vaishyas, and less intelligent women class. But that is not the actual fact. The bhakti cult is the topmost of all transcendental activities, and therefore it is simultaneously sublime and easy. It is sublime for the pure devotees who are serious about getting in contact with the Supreme Lord, and it is easy for the neophytes who are just on the threshold of the house of bhakti to achieve the contact of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Is a great science. And it is open for all living beings, including the Shudras, Vaishyas, women, and even those lower than the low-born Shudras. So what to speak of the high-class men, like the qualified Brahmanas and the great self-realized kings. The other high-grade activities designated as sacrifice, charity, austerity, etc., are all corollary factors following the pure and scientific bhakti cult. Corollary factors. paragraph. The principles of knowledge and detachment are two important factors on the path of transcendental realization. The whole spiritual process leads to perfect knowledge of everything, material and spiritual, and the result of such perfect knowledge, the results of such perfect knowledge are that one becomes detached from material affection and becomes attached to spiritual activities. Becoming detached from material things does not mean becoming inert altogether, as men with a poor fund of knowledge think. Nishkarma means not undertaking activities that will produce good or bad effects. Negation does not mean negation of the positive. Negation of the non-essentials does not mean negation of the essential. Similarly, detachment from material forms does not mean nullifying the positive form. The bhakti cult is meant for realization of the positive form. When the positive form is realized, the negative forms are automatically eliminated. Therefore, with the development of the bhakti cult, with the application of positive service to the positive form, one naturally becomes detached from the inferior things, and he becomes attached to superior things. Similarly, the bhakti cult, being the supermost occupation of the living being, leads him out of material sense enjoyment. That is the sign of a pure devotee. He is not a fool, nor is he engaged in inferior energies, nor does he have material values. This is not possible by dry reasoning. It actually happens by the grace of the Almighty. In conclusion, one who is a pure devotee has all other good qualities, namely knowledge, detachment, etc. But one who has only knowledge or detachment is not necessarily well acquainted with the principles of the bhakti cult. Bhakti is the supremest occupation of the human beings. These verses from Canto 1, Chapter 2, the earlier part, they summarize and set the tone or the standard for the process of devotional service itself and the process of awakening to God consciousness. They're directional and fundamental messages. The same understanding as in these verses is expressed elsewhere in different ways, from different angles, with different terminologies, but the essence is the essence. The essence is preserved throughout the whole of the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is the mature stage of Vyasadev's compositions. In other words, after everything else and everything else, under the instruction of Narada, he meditated in trance on the absolute truth and This is an expression of his realizations, and his expressions of his realizations includes, as it says here, knowledge of everything, because knowledge of the absolute truth, who is the source of everything, must include knowledge of everything. Knowledge of everything doesn't mean encyclopedia. Knowledge of everything means principles. And from those principles, then one can derive meaning and understanding to matter and spirit. One of the parts of Srila Prabhupada's teachings that I very much like and admire is how he could he would explain some incident that would happen, that had happened in his life, and the lesson that he learned from that incident that happened in his life. And then foundationally, that was a truth about life. And then he could understand more complex things, or the application of that principle that he had realized even in his youth, which meant, he had the acumen to understand things even as a small boy. Then as he was growing up, he started to understand the application better and more completely. So the phrase ashu, janiyati ashu vairagyam, jnanam cha yada haitukam. This word ashu means very quickly. Very soon. And then in the translation it becomes immediately. Now that, how to understand immediately? So a little bit of light and a little more light and more light. Something that's understood, a principle that's understood. It's like education. You may learn something in school, and then the next class and that class, you build upon that. The fundamental understanding don't change, but the application becomes more refined. What to speak of spiritual understanding? No, behind even material is spiritual. Behind material manifestations, they're reflections, or they're derived from the spiritual. It's an important principle. There are persons, largely, in this world, not just the leading scientists and educators and philosophers and learned persons. They know, they have a lot of information. They know a lot of things about a lot of things. However, by the very process of knowledge, by speculative knowledge, there's a whole field of knowledge that they cannot understand. That whole field of knowledge is transcendence, or God, or the Supreme. They have their methodology prevents them from understanding. Conversely, if one focuses on the Supreme, then that's what this verse is saying. But through the process of Bhakti Yoga, one may focus on the Supreme. And one who does that causelessly, ahituki, causelessly, and at once, that means little by little, then eventually fully, but because the process, it begins and then it continues and continues, so that one may come to the stage of realization, full realization of the absolute truth. And that full realization of the absolute truth has these two highly esteemed characteristics: knowledge and detachment. There are sections of the Bhagavatam and then teachings related to the Bhagavatam literatures that explain those who are in the speculative knowledge category. Their intention is, and they may come to the stage of realization and experience of Brahman, or that which lies beyond the range of the senses, beyond the mind, by the guidance of the process properly applied. They may realize or have at least an inkling of the realm of transcendence. Back to this verse, bhakti process is not expressing that. So beyond Brahman, what is it? So beyond matter is Brahman. Beyond Brahman, what is it? Para Brahman. So those who are applying themselves to the Gyan process, it's not a field of subject matter for them to contemplate or understand. They'll misunderstand and dismiss it or whatever, relegate it again into the material because of their orientation, their disposition, their methodology. Guaranteed they won't get understanding of the Supreme, because the understanding of the Supreme is by the bhakti process. The Supreme Person is through the bhakti process. And that's what this verse is saying. It's connected to the previous verse. But Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha, applying devotional service. Applying devotional service, by definition, means engaging the senses in the service of the master of the senses. Engaging the senses sounds like material. So, Prabhupada doesn't hesitate. He does it twice, but he builds his case, and the case is built upon people say bad things. But he doesn't hesitate, doesn't skirt around it. It's like this is and it's true. This is what they say. There's variations on the theme, but this is what people say. The bhakti process is for weak-minded people, because they can't do the rigors of Gyan. They don't have the capacity. They don't have the substance, and so they're sentimentalists. They take the sentimental activities and conclusions, and it's all silly for weak-minded people. But it's okay, because the weak-minded people can also get something, and maybe one day they'll become strong-minded and they'll become like us, able to understand the oneness, and etc. So they have their orientation towards bhakti and bhakti rasa and the object of bhakti, and so having stated what these arguers, the Purva Paksha folks, have to say, he then strongly, when reading, for me, when reading the Bhagavatam, especially this first canto, that the context in which Prabhupada was compiling the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's good to keep it in mind. There he is sitting in his rooms in Radha Damodar temple, writing to the world that doesn't know anything. Of course, it's not only outside of India, people don't know, but certainly that was his audience. People that don't know. They have something, some religion of some religious idea, some people. So how is he going to get the people that have a very different orientation and attachment to understand? So he has to include, he does include, there are some people that say these bad things that are just wrong. And so he doesn't hesitate to state their argument and then refute their argument authoritatively. Amongst the educated people, even amongst the not so well educated people, those respect and high regard naturally goes to people who have abundant knowledge in the world. Those persons are respected. And detachment, of course, there are degrees of detachment, but that's a sign of one who has knowledge. But what's the essence of that detachment? Then there's different ideas of what the essence of that detachment is. And the bhakti process doesn't say throw it away and then that detachment. The bhakti process says recognize whatever there is that you're considering to throw away. Where did it come from? And does it have a place in service to Krishna? If not, then you throw it away or you leave it to the side. But otherwise, engaging oneself in activities of bhakti. Here's one example. The Yukta Vairagya principle. Prabhupada learned much from his spiritual master, and one of the things that he learned, he shared. That the traditional practice for an elevated person of knowledge was their detachment, and he used as examples the 6 Goswamis in Vrindavan, how they lived, and the situation of opulence from which they came, and they just left it without hesitation, and they lived so simply. And not only lived so simply, Prabhupada was explaining that they lived under a different tree every day. Now, sometimes they stayed in the same facility, the same vicinity to do their writing, but they kept moving. And not only they kept moving, Prabhupada's explaining, they didn't stay together. They didn't have a Sangha community. And his explanation was that you stay under the same tree every day, you can get attached to that, staying under that tree. So in principle, they wouldn't stay. And then another tree. Of course, trees are nice, but so he would see who Prabhupada was going on and on about the standard of the 6 Goswamis, and then he quickly reversed it and said, however, Bhaktisiddhanta accepted living in a palatial building. And does that mean that Bhaktisiddhanta was contradicting or refuting the teachings and by example of the 6 Goswamis? And it's a very fine understanding, but it's the Yukta Vairagya principle. The danger of Yukta Vairagya principle is attachment and pride. Just see how I'm detached. I can engage myself with this or that or the other and remain detached. So pride or becoming attached. Contact this and that and the other thing, and you engage in Krishna service. Next thing you know, you're being engaged in its service, or Maya is engaging you in her service in the name of devotional service. With the Vairagya. It's fine. Edge. To actually live one's life with accepting, with detachment, whether it's knowledge or paraphernalia, or dravya, but facilities. Not that it's the spiritualist is you go and get this the negation, the abnegation. That's not the teaching. It's not the example. It's not even implied. But detachment is needed. And how is that? This verse is describing by the causelessly knowledge and detachment arise when one engages in Bhagavat Bhakti or Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janyati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chalyad Aitikam. What real knowledge is and what real detachment is arise. And so that's the effect. The coveted result is achieved by something other than cultivation of knowledge or cultivation of detachment. It's by cultivation of bhakti. It's an important principle. So what bhakti? So that the definition of bhakti, we have our two primary definitions of bhakti. But Rupa Goswami's is superlative. Anyabhinashatushanyam jnana karma janavartam anukulyena krishna anushilam. Very simply. Very simply. The cultivation of that which is pleasing to Krishna. That's the standard of success of life, or mission of life. The bell rings when Krishna is pleased. Of course, there's no end to it. It's not like it'll be a forever ringing bell if one becomes a pure devotee. But the Krishna connection is established by that principle. And without that connection by principle, then everything remains a mystery. So go the other direction, what this verse is. By engagement in devotional service to the personality of Godhead, causes the knowledge of detachment to rise. And knowledge, what is that knowledge? It's in a broad sense, everything. But knowledge of the source of everything means knowledge of everything doesn't mean Mangsaka. That you have something to say about everything. And you say it with authority because you have knowledge. And your authority and knowledge. So you can say anything about anything. And so that's not what the meaning. It's the principle. The knowledge of that from which everything comes immediately implies that something that has come from the source should be connected to the source. It's not up for grabs. I can try to make it mine and become the enjoyer of that something. That's material. Where there's forgetfulness of the source, so forgetfulness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, material life, or impersonal life, there's no sense of connection to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's very simple. And yet so many verses to explain something that's very simple. And it's explained in a number of different ways, in a number of different places, because we're attached, we're thick, we're covered. It takes hearing it again and again to go home. So therefore these earlier verses, I'll just finish with this, these earlier verses in chapter 2, they're giving essences of the sadhana and sadhya, the process and the goal. And the process provides, as this verse is saying, what real renunciation and what real knowledge is. Real renunciation isn't giving stuff up. Real renunciation is utilizing to your capacity and appropriately something would come from the Supreme in the service of the Supreme in that consciousness of bhakti. The Supreme should be pleased. In principle, it's simple. And it's a nice lifestyle too. Very satisfying. Ahitoti pratyata. Niratma supersediti. Okay, let's see if there's some discussion.
Krishna Maharaj. Sometimes we see people who are looking for bhakti process, but they never reach this Krishna bhakti. Instead, they get. I just this
You're
last
thinking of
week.
some people.
Yeah, they get into some other type of bhakti process, other tradition, but they are sincerely looking. Otherwise, why would they even think in terms of bhakti? But why even such people don't get the mercy of devotees or Krishna? Instead, they end up somewhere else.
By association with devotees, you're getting the mercy of the devotees, just by association. And why does it go in or not go in is the question. You know, why is it, for some it takes a long time, and some it's more quick, more rapid. You know, it's the attachment, attached to, then fill in the blank. If I'm attached to whatever, then I'm going to be unable to, supposing I'm holding on to something in my hand. I'm holding on to cartels. And I feel thirsty. I don't feel thirsty, so don't worry about it. But if I'm holding on to the cartels and I want some water, I have to put the cartels down that I can take the water. So if I'm attached, similarly, if one is attached to something to receive another something, even I'm searching and inquiring about bhakti. However, I already have a predisposed idea, and I'm attached to my predisposed idea. Even I'm searching. So there has to be willingness to receive. There has to be a willingness to let go. But I don't want to let go if I'm attached. And if I let go, then maybe I'll have nothing. I'll be bereft. Like Arjuna says in Bhagavad Gita, like a riven cloud with no place in any sphere. I don't want that. So I want bhakti, but I don't want to let go. I'm attached.
So, in other words, there is an underlying deep desire for something else, which the person may or may not even recognize. That.
Yeah. This lends itself to the bhakti rasa topic. because people, they're attached to there's a taste to that something that they're attached to, and they have affinity for that taste, and they don't want to. They're sincere. They're looking, but so it's quite okay. It's quite common. We meet people from different. How many persons? There are some persons, unique persons, that have this affinity or that affinity or this religious disposition or that religious orientation or and so on. And they can profoundly appreciate Krishna Bhakti without feeling attacked or without attacking Krishna Bhakti, are going to convert you, save you, and so because you haven't accepted something. You haven't accepted Christ, or you haven't accepted the Quran, or you haven't accepted because, you're either us or them. So it's an attachment. And and so that from our position, how can we should, and depending upon our elevation of consciousness, have respect for someone who has, like the individual you're describing. They're sincere, they're searching. Great. And if they're not willing to accept what to do, why and what to do, they're attached to whatever it is that they do have. They don't want to let go of whatever it is that they do have while they're searching. No, it's unfortunate, but so that's the why, and then what to do. Just smile and continue to give Krishna Bhakti, and inquire from Krishna the ways and means, which is then it will take some descending empowerment to the well-wisher of this other person. Then and then oneself that Krishna Bhakti may flow in my life more completely, more purely, so that I'll then have the power and the intelligence how to assist this person to go from position X to position A. In a way that it's not condescending, it's just a way that's effective. Something else?
Couple of questions, Gurumaharaj. When speaking on the Canto 1 verses, you often remind us of the context, and that makes it very special. Thinking about the vulnerability that Prabhupada is stepping into, the total unknown of his Mission Impossible. It's like stepping into the wilderness. And Prabhupada was familiar with the British way of thinking, with his exposure to Scottish Churches College and, the Gaudiya Math members that had been to England. A curiosity that comes to my mind is, how did he know, before he even stepped onto the shores of America, his audience so well to be able to write? I mean, this purport is just a masterpiece.
My sense is there's probably multiple ways to answer this. Besides, he was a worldly man, from the material perspective. He was empowered. He could understand things that most people don't have the capacity to understand. No, he, for example, he has many people who are living in that side of the world, who are thinking of people in this side of the world. The streets are lined with gold and everyone's wealthy, and then he was living on the Bowery and saw bums sleep on the sidewalk, and it was a rude awakening. So but the audience, the general speaking audience, he had a sense of their orientation. And times change. Some things that Prabhupada wrote when he wrote the first canto, times have changed. Mindsets have changed. Younger generation, particularly, has its orientation and disposition. Yet at the same time, there are fundamental principles that he understood and addressed. There's another way of saying the same thing is there's timeless wisdom, and the audience that he hadn't met yet had some affinity for matter, and the particular shape of it he hadn't experienced, but in the principle of it he had a knowledge of, and as well he was empowered. So that the person that's so empowered, they can see and understand and speak things that other people can't see, understand, and speak effectively. He was gifted. I'm pausing, thinking about where did he get, he from Krishna, because what his teacher, principal teacher, of course, there were the acharyas, and his principal teacher was Bhaktisiddhanta, and Prabhupada said on more than one occasion, multiple occasions, he couldn't understand. One lecture, Prabhupada said, I understood 75 to 80% I couldn't understand. So where did he get? But whatever that sound vibration was went in. And then went in, then Prabhupada processed the way that he processed. In other words, he got mercy. And then by empowerment, he understood things that not by his intellect, but by the indication of Super Soul, he could understand. Chitta Guru and Diksha Guru or Shiksha Guru, he could understand from within. And well connected. So that's some answer. Anything else, anybody? You have something else?
Okay. Maharaj, you were speaking of how Vyasadeva in his maturity of realization composed the Srimad Bhagavatam. And we hear that Bhagavatam is a graduate study and Chaitanya Charitamrita is a postgraduate study. So is it because the Chaitanya Charitamrita exemplifies or brings the Bhagavatam's teachings or principles into life through the life of Lord Chaitanya? Is that why it's even a further advanced than Vyasadev's?
Well, there's multiple. That's one feature. A very prominent feature is Bhakti Rasa. And the exhibitions of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's super elevated status of bhakti, in love, in the mood of Radha, tasting it, displaying it, it gets so high you get dizzy. I mean, it's awesome, but it's not like reading Bhagavad Gita verses. So it's another feature that is my understanding, which makes it the postgraduate study. And the way that Prabhupada included references in the purports to embellish or explain points that were being made in the text. And, Similarly, the details and details and details and details of topics that are in the Bhagavatam are explained in a certain way in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that's even more refined in the Bhagavatam, the process of creation, for example. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki